I can still remember the taste of that evening, the mix of sweetness and bitterness that clung to my throat like unspoken words. My daughter's engagement, the day I had been waiting for since she was a little girl playing dress-up with her mother's old scarves. I had imagined it countless times, me standing proudly beside her, maybe giving a small speech, my chest swelling with pride as she held her fiancé's hand. But reality has a cruel way of twisting dreams into something unrecognizable. The hall was grander than anything I had ever stepped into. Chandeliers sparkled above me like 100 tiny suns, their light bouncing off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. People dressed in their finest silks and tailored suits floated around the room, laughing, clinking glasses, exchanging pleasantries. I stood near the edge, clutching a small gift box I could barely afford, a neatly wrapped package that held nothing more than a pair of earrings. Not the expensive kind, just something delicate, something I thought my daughter would treasure because it came from me. I had spent the last of my savings on those earrings. To anyone else in that room, they would seem cheap, almost laughable. But for me, every bead, every polished curve, was heavy with years of sacrifice, of love, of sleepless nights spent working so she could smile a little brighter the next day. As I adjusted my old jacket, one I had pressed 3 times over to hide its worn threads, I caught sight of my daughter across the hall. She looked radiant, almost unreal in her emerald green gown. Her smile lit up the room, and for a moment the noise faded. It was just her and me, like it had always been. My little girl, my reason for everything. I lifted my hand slightly as though to wave, but stopped midway. Because just then, her fiancé's mother leaned in and whispered something in her ear. My daughter's smile faltered, only for a second, before she steadied herself and nodded. That small exchange hit me harder than I expected. I knew they didn't like me. From the very beginning, their eyes had judged me, scanning my shoes, my clothes, the way I carried myself. I was the outsider, the man who had raised his daughter alone after her mother left. The poor father who couldn't give his child the world in silver platters but gave her his entire soul. And in their world of wealth and pretense, that wasn't enough. The ceremony moved forward, with laughter and toasts, introductions and photographs. I kept to the side, invisible but content just to watch her glow. My chest swelled with a quiet pride that no one could steal from me. Or so I thought. It was during the toasts that it happened. The groom's father had just finished a long speech about family unity and shared prosperity. People clapped politely, glasses raised high. Then, before the applause even died down, the groom's mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Why is he even here?" she said, not in a whisper, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her lips curled in disdain as her eyes darted toward me. "We don't need him here. This is our family's celebration, not his." The words slammed into me, heavier than any blow I'd ever received in my life. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard, but the hush that spread across the tables confirmed it. Heads turned. Eyes shifted toward me. Some guests looked away quickly, ashamed for me. Others smirked behind their glasses, enjoying the drama like it was a performance put on for their entertainment. I felt my throat tighten, a dry ache clawing up as though I had swallowed shards of glass. My hands trembled against the small gift box, and I quickly hid it behind my back. The earrings suddenly felt ridiculous, like a child's trinket, unworthy of this polished, gleaming world. Whispers began to ripple through the room. "Is that her father? Why is he dressed like that? I heard he's not successful, doesn't even own property. No wonder they don't want him around." Each hushed voice was a dagger. I lowered my eyes, staring at the glossy marble floor that seemed to mock me with its perfect reflection. I wished I could sink into it, disappear entirely, dissolve into nothing before anyone saw the shame in my face. I had imagined this day so differently. I had thought maybe the groom's family would look past the surface. Maybe they would see the man who raised her, the father who played both mother and father, who never once turned away when life got unbearably hard. But in their eyes, all I was a burden, an embarrassment. My chest heaved, and for a moment, I thought of leaving, walking out of that hall and never looking back. Maybe it would have been easier, less humiliating. But then I looked at her, my daughter. She was standing there, frozen, her eyes wide as if she had been slapped across the face. She looked from them to me, back and forth, caught in the cruelest tug of loyalty a child could face. I felt my heart crack. This was supposed to be her happiest night, and instead, she was forced to choose between the two worlds she loved. I didn't want to make it harder for her, so I forced a smile, weak and broken, and lowered my gaze again, preparing myself to quietly step away, to fade into the shadows where they clearly believed I belonged. But just as I took a step back, Just as my shame was about to swallow me whole, I saw my daughter move. Her hands clenched at her sides, her chin lifted, her breath deepened. Something shifted in her eyes, a fire, a defiance I hadn't seen in years. And then, before anyone could stop her, she took a step toward me. The hall grew silent, the music fading into nothing but the echo of her heels clicking against the polished floor. Every gaze followed her, anticipation thick as fog. And in that stillness, in that charged, unbearable silence, she opened her mouth. What she said next silenced the room. When people looked at me in that hall, they saw a man who didn't belong. A man out of place, underdressed, carrying a cheap gift. They saw the surface, the rough edges, the weathered face, the shoes that had been resoled more times than I cared to admit. What they didn't see, what they could never understand, were the miles I had walked to stand in that room. They didn't know that I once stood in a hospital corridor, trembling, the night my daughter was born. I had held her in my arms for the first time while her mother slept, exhausted, and I whispered promises to her tiny ears. Promises I had no idea how I would keep, but I made them anyway. I told her she would never be alone, that I would be enough, and for years, it was just us. Her mother left when she was barely 6. One day she was there, the next she was gone, leaving only a folded note on the kitchen table that said she wanted a different life. That was all. A different life, as though the one we had wasn't enough. As though our daughter wasn't worth staying for. I can still remember the way my little girl clutched my leg that night, asking, "Where's Mommy?" Her voice was small, fragile, a sound that cracked my heart in ways I never thought possible. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the answers. So I did the only thing I could. I held her tight, kissed her hair, and told her I wasn't going anywhere. From then on, every day became a test of how much one man could endure for the sake of one small child. I worked late shifts at the factory, my hands blistered and raw, sometimes coming home just as the sun rose. I'd sneak into her room, still in my grease-stained clothes, to watch her sleep. Her tiny fists curled, her hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. It gave me strength I didn't know I had. But there were nights I broke down. Nights when my body screamed for rest, and my mind whispered that I couldn't do it anymore. Then I'd remember her smile, the gap-toothed grin when she lost her first tooth, the way her eyes sparkled when she showed me the drawing she made at school, and I'd push through. I skipped meals so she could eat. I wore the same coat winter after winter so she could have new shoes each year. My shoes had holes in the soles, patched with cardboard, but hers always fit, always shone when she walked into class. I didn't care what people thought of me. As long as she walked tall, I could crawl if I had to. Her birthdays were the hardest and the most beautiful. I couldn't afford clowns or magicians, not even big cakes with fancy designs. So I became all of that. I would bake small cakes from scratch, burning my fingers as I tried to ice them with shaky hands. Sometimes the cake came out lopsided, the icing uneven. But when she clapped her hands and shouted, "Daddy made it for me!" I felt like the richest man alive. I remember one year in particular. She wanted a dollhouse, the kind her friends had with plastic furniture and colorful walls. I didn't have the money, but I had scrap wood and old nails, so I stayed up nights, carving, hammering, painting with leftover house paint. On her birthday, I placed it in front of her. Her eyes widened, her little hands covering her mouth, and then she hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. She whispered, "It's perfect, Daddy." And in that moment, I believed it was. Every morning I walked her to school, hand in hand, rain or shine. Sometimes, after a 12-hour shift, my feet dragged, but I never let go of her hand. She would chatter about her teachers, her friends, her dreams. She once told me she wanted to be a dancer. I told her she could be anything she wanted. I promised her I'd be there in the front row, clapping the loudest. And I was. Every recital, every performance, even when I had to beg for an extra hour off work, I was there. There was one evening I'll never forget. She was 10, performing a small solo in her school's annual recital. My shirt was torn at the collar, my shoes muddy from work, but I sat right in the front, my eyes fixed on her. When she spotted me in the audience, her face lit up. She danced with more energy than anyone else on that stage, and when it was over, she ran straight to me, breathless, sweaty, but glowing. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I danced for you, Daddy." Moments like that kept me alive. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Nights were filled with laughter as we ate simple dinners together. Sometimes it was just rice and lentils, sometimes a little meat when I could afford it, but the food always tasted better because we shared it. She would talk about her day, and I would listen like every word was gold. I wanted her to feel safe, loved, treasured, I wanted her to know that even if the world turned its back on us, her father never would. But the truth is, I was always afraid. Afraid I wasn't enough. Afraid she would grow up, see the cracks in our lives, and resent me for it. I tried to hide my struggles, but children see more than we realize. She once caught me staring at an unpaid electricity bill, my head in my hands. She touched my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Daddy. We'll be okay." She was only 9. No child should have to comfort their parent like that. Still, we made it. We survived storms, hunger, loneliness. I thought we came out stronger. I thought all those years of sacrifice built an unbreakable bond between us. She was my world, and I believed I was hers. As I stood in that engagement hall, surrounded by people who judged me without knowing me, my mind kept drifting back to those memories, each one a reminder of the love that shaped our lives. But standing there, invisible, unwanted, mocked for simply existing, a small voice in me whispered something I didn't want to hear. Maybe those sacrifices didn't matter to anyone but me. Maybe the bond I clung to had already cracked without me realizing. I thought those sacrifices would mean something. But I was wrong. I first met the groom's family on a rainy afternoon, months before the engagement. My daughter had invited me, her voice carrying both excitement and nervousness over the phone. "Dad, I want you to meet them. Please, try your best, okay?" She didn't say it outright, but I heard the tremor in her tone, the unspoken plea. "Don't embarrass me." I ironed my best shirt for that meeting, one that was more thread than fabric after so many years. I polished my shoes until they almost shone, ignoring the scuffs that wouldn't disappear. When I arrived, the house itself made me hesitate. It was large, towering, with white columns and glass doors that reflected the world like mirrors. The kind of home you only saw in magazines. I stood on the steps, clutching a small bag of sweets I had bought as a gesture, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my poverty settle heavily on my shoulders. The door opened before I could knock. Her fiancé's mother stood there, elegant in a silk sari, her gold bangles jingling faintly as she crossed her arms. She looked me up and down in a single sweep, her eyes narrowing just slightly at my shirt collar, my worn shoes. She didn't smile. Instead, she stepped aside with a flat voice. "Come in." Inside, the house gleamed. Marble floors, chandeliers, paintings that looked too expensive to touch. I suddenly became conscious of every sound I made. The squeak of my shoes, the way I cleared my throat. My daughter rushed over, her face glowing with love, and introduced me proudly. "This is my father." The room grew still for half a second. Her fiancé's father, a man with silver hair and sharp eyes behind rimless glasses, nodded once, but didn't offer his hand. "Yes, yes," he said, as though he were acknowledging a delivery man, not a parent. We sat together in the living room, though I never quite felt like I belonged on their polished furniture. They spoke of business, investments, foreign trips. I nodded politely, trying to follow, but the language was foreign to me. Numbers and stocks had never been my world. My world had been time cards and overtime, grease-stained uniforms, and aching bones at the end of the day. When I finally offered the sweets, the mother's lips tightened. "Oh, local ones," she said. "We usually don't eat much sugar. Too unhealthy." She placed the box on the far end of the table, untouched. My ears burned, but I forced a smile. As the evening wore on, their questions began. Simple at first, but laced with a sharpness I couldn't miss. "So, Mr. Rahman," the father said, swirling the ice in his glass, "what exactly do you do these days?" I cleared my throat. "I work at the factory. Maintenance supervisor." "Ah," he said, leaning back, as though the word itself was beneath him. "And before that?" "I've worked there most of my life," I answered, pride creeping into my voice. It paid for her schooling, for everything she needed. The mother's eyebrows arched. "Factory work must be difficult. Not much security, I imagine. And the pay?" She let the question hang in the air like a trap. I shifted uncomfortably, but before I could answer, my daughter jumped in. "Dad worked hard so I could go to university. He made sure I never lacked anything." Her voice was firm, protective, and for a moment, I saw her mother's fire in her eyes. The mother smiled faintly at her son-in-law-to-be instead of me. "Yes, well, that's admirable. But of course, times are different now. Our family expects a certain standard." The word standard landed like a stone in my chest. That was the first meeting, and though it ended politely enough, I walked home with the heavy knowledge that they had already judged me. To them, I was not a man who had given his life to raising his daughter. I was simply a poor father, unworthy of their gilded world. It didn't stop there. At another dinner, I wore a suit I had borrowed from a neighbor for the evening. Too tight at the shoulders, a little loose at the waist, but better than what I owned. As I entered, the groom's father smiled thinly and said, "Ah, I see you've dressed up tonight. Much better." The words sounded like a compliment, but the smirk that followed made it sting like mockery. The conversations at those gatherings were always the same. Business ventures, travel, expensive hobbies. They spoke of golfing trips abroad, of designer brands, of art collections. When the father asked me if I had ever traveled outside the country, I admitted honestly that I hadn't. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, you'll see someday. Though at your age," his voice trailed off, and the silence that followed carried more judgment than words ever could. Each encounter was another cut, another reminder that no matter how much I loved my daughter, in their eyes I would never measure up. But what hurt most wasn't their words. It was the look in my daughter's eyes. That flicker of discomfort whenever they mocked me. That tight smile she forced to keep the peace. I could see her torn in two, part of her wanting to defend me, another part desperate for their approval, for her place in their glittering world. One evening, after yet another strained dinner, I walked her home. She slipped her arm through mine like she used to when she was little, and for a while, we walked in silence. Then she said softly, "Dad, they just don't understand you." I stopped. "And you? Do you understand me?" She looked up at me, her eyes glistening in the streetlights. "Of course I do. I know what you've done for me. I need you to be patient with them, please, for me." Her plea twisted in my chest. How could I refuse her? She was all I had, so I nodded and promised I'd try, even as my heart broke a little more. But no matter how hard I tried, the distance only grew. At family events, they would whisper just loud enough for me to hear. "Look at his shoes. He eats like he's never seen fine food before. I wonder what kind of gift he'll bring this time." They laughed behind polite smiles, knives hidden in velvet, and through it all I kept quiet. I smiled when I had to. I swallowed the bitterness, telling myself it was for my daughter's happiness. If this was the price I had to pay, I would pay it. But somewhere deep inside, a fear began to grow. What if my daughter started to believe them? What if one day she looked at me and saw not the father who raised her, but the poor man they mocked? I tried to shake it off. I told myself she loved me too much, that our bond was unshakable. But in quiet moments, when her laughter with them rang louder than her words to me, I felt a cold emptiness creeping in. And then, at the engagement itself, that fear came alive. Because all those subtle insults, all those small humiliations, were just rehearsals for the cruelty they unleashed on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of our lives. But their true cruelty was yet to come. After that string of dinners and strained encounters, I realized something. If I didn't make more of an effort, I might lose my daughter to their world entirely. She loved me, I knew that, but she also loved him, and by extension them. And as much as I despised their arrogance, I couldn't bear the thought of being shut out of her future. So, I tried. It started with the suit. I had never owned one worth mentioning. My old jackets had carried me through weddings, funerals, graduations, always pressed and cleaned, though never new. But I could tell from the way the groom's family glanced at me that those clothes were one more reminder to them of where I came from. I wanted, at the very least, to meet them halfway. Buying that suit meant dipping into the money I had set aside for emergencies. I stood in front of the shop mirror, turning awkwardly as the salesman pinned the cuffs. My reflection stared back at me. Older, thinner, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. But the navy fabric gave me a different outline. Almost dignified, almost belonging. When I wore it to the next gathering, I caught the groom's mother's eyes flicker over me, the faintest lift of her brow before she turned away. No compliment, no acknowledgement, but also no smirk. For a second, I thought maybe I had managed to chip away at the wall between us. I carried myself differently that night, sitting straighter, smiling more. I even tried to join their conversations, asked about the latest travel destination they had mentioned, inquired about the artwork on their walls, but each attempt was met with clipped responses, the kind that ended the topic before it could begin. The father gave me a polite smile and said, "Yes, we often go abroad. You wouldn't know the place." The dismissal stung more than if he had insulted me outright. The son, my daughter's fiancé, wasn't much better. He never mocked me to my face, but he rarely looked at me directly either. His laughter with his parents was effortless, easy. With me, it was forced, brittle, the kind you give someone when you want to end the conversation quickly. I tried not to let it show, but inside I felt like an intruder in their home, in their lives, even in my own daughter's future. Still, I kept pushing. At one dinner, I brought a bottle of sweet syrup I had saved up to buy, thinking it would make a nice gesture. "This is from a small shop in the old part of town," I explained as I placed it on the table. "They use traditional methods. I thought you might enjoy it." The groom's father smiled tightly. "Ah, thank you, though we usually only keep imported brands in the house." He set the bottle aside without opening it. I smiled as though I hadn't noticed, but inside, something twisted. Every gesture I made seemed to vanish into thin air, unacknowledged, unwanted. Yet I kept trying for her, always for her. One evening, after yet another silent car ride home where I stared out the window, lost in thought, my daughter placed her hand on mine. "Dad," she said softly, "don't worry about them. They're just different. But I love you. That won't change." Her words were warm, but her voice carried a tremor. It wasn't conviction. It was reassurance, the kind you give someone when you're trying to convince yourself too. I nodded, forcing a smile. But deep inside, I felt the seed of doubt sprouting roots, because I saw how she glowed in their presence, how she tried to match their elegance, their polished mannerisms. She laughed at their jokes even when they were at my expense. Once, her future mother-in-law teased, "Your father must have eaten with his hands growing up, No wonder he doesn't know the right cutlery." My daughter laughed along, too quickly, too loudly. She squeezed my hand under the table as if to say, "Don't take it seriously." But I did. Of course I did. Nights alone in my small apartment, I would stare at the suit hanging in the corner, wondering if it made any difference at all. I replayed their smirks, their glances, their silences, until they became louder than words. And I asked myself the question I feared most. Was my daughter slowly being pulled away from me, piece by piece? I told myself I was imagining it, that she would never forget the man who raised her, who stood by her through every storm. I reminded myself of the birthdays, the school recitals, the nights I held her when she cried about her mother. Those memories had to mean something, didn't they? But the world she lived in now was not the world I gave her. It was shinier, richer, crueler, and I couldn't compete with that. One night, as I walked her back to her car after dinner, I finally asked, "Do they talk about me when I'm not there?" She froze just for a second. That pause told me everything, but she forced a smile and shook her head. "No, Dad, you're overthinking it." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they hollowed me out, because her smile was too thin, her voice too soft, her eyes too careful. I wanted to believe her. I tried. For days, I repeated her words in my head like a mantra. "You're overthinking it. You're overthinking it." But doubt has a way of growing louder when you try to silence it. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling that my place in her life was shrinking, that I was being pushed to the sidelines, gently but firmly, until all that remained was a memory of who I once was to her. I told myself it was all in my head, until the night everything exploded. The tension that had been simmering finally began to boil when talk of the engagement party reached the table. I had been waiting for that conversation, eager in my own quiet way. It was a milestone, after all, and no matter how the groom's family felt about me, I was still her father. I needed, to be part of it. We sat together in their grand living room, polished marble floors gleaming, chandeliers spilling golden light across the room. The groom's mother spread out glossy brochures on the coffee table. Venues, catering options, florists. She spoke with excitement, her voice carrying that commanding edge that left no room for disagreement. "This hall is the best in the city," she said, tapping the photo of a sprawling ballroom. "We can't settle for anything less. After all, our family name carries weight," her husband nodded. "And for food, only the five-star hotel catering will do. Guests should remember this day not just for the couple, but for the prestige it reflects." I listened quietly, waiting for the right moment. Finally, I cleared my throat. "I'd like to contribute. I've saved up. Maybe I can take care of the catering, or the flowers." The groom's mother's smile was polite, sharp as glass. "That's kind, but unnecessary. These arrangements are quite costly. It wouldn't be right to burden you." Her words were honeyed, but the sting underneath was clear. "You can't afford this." "Stay out," I pressed on anyway. "She's my daughter. I want to do my part." The groom himself spoke this time, his tone casual but cutting. "Uncle, don't worry. We've got it covered. You don't need to strain yourself. Just be there to bless us, that's enough." The way he said uncle gnawed at me. It stripped away the very title that mattered most. Father. My daughter looked at me then, her eyes darting nervously between us. She gave me a small smile, one that pleaded, "Let it go, Dad." And so I did. I leaned back, my voice caught in my throat. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my worn ledger book. Page after page showed careful notes. Her school fees, recital costumes, hospital bills from when she had the flu. Every number represented a sacrifice. And yet now, when it came to her greatest celebration, my place was being erased. I promised myself I would try harder. But at every family dinner that followed, my presence grew smaller, thinner, like smoke dissipating into air. They spoke of guest lists, decorators, honeymoon plans. I tried to join in. "Have you thought about inviting your old teacher? She always cared so much for you," I asked my daughter once. Her fiancé's mother chuckled lightly, dismissively. "Oh, those kinds of people wouldn't know how to behave in such a gathering." The conversation swept past me like a current, dragging her with it, leaving me behind on the shore. Even at the dinner table, I was invisible. Plates were passed around me as though I wasn't there. Jokes were shared that I wasn't invited to understand. And my daughter, my sweet, once inseparable girl, sat there laughing with them, her hand resting in her fiancé's, her smile aimed at his parents. When her eyes met mine, she would look away too quickly, ashamed or afraid. One evening, I arrived at their house to find the table already set. They didn't wait for me. They didn't even greet me properly. The groom's father muttered, "Oh, you made it," as though my presence were an inconvenience. I sat silently through that dinner, pushing food around my plate, feeling the weight of their indifference crushing me. For the first time, I wondered if perhaps they truly didn't need me at all. The walk back home was long, the streets quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. I tried to remind myself of who I was, of what I had done. I reminded myself that I was the man who raised her when no one else would, that my love was carved into every moment of her life. But love doesn't always shine in the face of wealth and arrogance. Sometimes it is drowned out, smothered under the weight of appearances. Day by day, I felt her slipping further. Phone calls grew shorter. Texts went unanswered. When I did see her, her mind seemed elsewhere, her laughter belonging to another world that no longer had space for me. Still, I told myself I could endure it. For her. Always for her. But then came the moment that shattered me completely. I had thought the worst of the humiliation had already passed. That being dismissed, looked down upon, and tolerated only out of necessity was all I would have to endure. But life has a way of testing how much weight a man's heart can carry before it breaks. And the cracks in mine began to show the moment talk of the engagement ceremony grew serious. It was supposed to be a joyful discussion. A gathering of two families planning a milestone together, dreaming up a night to celebrate love. I remember walking into their sitting room with cautious hope, carrying an envelope tucked in my jacket. Inside was the money I had been saving quietly for months. I'd cut corners on food, skipped small comforts, worked extra shifts, anything to make sure I could do my part. This was my daughter's engagement, and I wanted to contribute, no matter how little it seemed compared to their wealth. The brochures were already spread out when I arrived. Shiny, expensive venues with golden chandeliers and sprawling banquet halls stared back at me from glossy pages. The groom's mother leaned forward, excitement spilling from her voice as she spoke. "This hall is perfect. Only the best will do for our son's engagement, and of course we'll need the premium catering package. 5 courses, imported wines, the works." Her husband nodded in agreement. "The flowers must be done by the top designer. We can't compromise on presentation. Everyone important will be there, and appearances matter." I listened quietly, waiting for an opening, gripping the envelope in my pocket as though it were my lifeline. Finally, I cleared my throat. "If it's all right, I'd like to contribute. I've saved a little. Perhaps I could cover the flowers or the music. Something meaningful. It's important to me." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the groom's mother looked at me with a smile so thin it could cut. "That's kind but unnecessary. These arrangements are far more costly than you realize. We don't want you to feel burdened." Her words were coated in sugar, but underneath lay the same poison I'd heard before. "You're not good enough. Stay out of the way," I tried again, softer this time. "I'm her father. I just want to be part of it." The groom chuckled lightly, almost dismissively. "Uncle, you've done enough by raising her. Don't worry about the expenses. We've got this covered." That word again, uncle. It stripped me of the very role I had bled and sacrificed for all those years. Not father, not dad. Just a polite, distant uncle. My daughter's eyes darted toward me then, filled with a nervous plea. She smiled too quickly. "Dad, it's okay, really. You don't have to push yourself. They've already planned everything." I nodded. Because what else could I do? To insist further would have embarrassed her. So I let the envelope remain in my pocket, its weight suddenly unbearable. as though it carried not money but the years of my sacrifice. Dismissed with a single sentence. From that moment on, my role in the preparations diminished into nothing. Every dinner, every conversation, I found myself sinking deeper into invisibility. They would speak of guest lists, of caterers, of decorations, always we and our, never you, never us. I remember one evening vividly. The table was set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Laughter filled the room as the groom's father told a story about one of his business partners. I tried to join in, offering a small comment. That reminds me of a teacher my daughter had in school, she always said. Before I could finish, the groom's mother waved her hand lightly, as if swatting away a fly. Yes, but this is different. You wouldn't understand. The conversation moved on without me. I sat there, staring at my untouched plate, my daughter's laughter echoing in my ears. She laughed at their jokes now, their stories, their world. And when her eyes met mine, they lingered only for a heartbeat before looking away, as though she were afraid of what she might see written on my face. At another dinner, I brought a small box of sweets from a shop near my neighborhood. They were her childhood favorites, little sugar-dusted pieces she used to beg me for after school. I placed them on the table with a smile. I thought you might enjoy these. She loved them when she was small. The groom's father glanced at the box and chuckled. Ah, local sweets. How quaint. But you know, we usually only serve imported desserts now. No one touched them. The box sat unopened through the entire evening until a servant cleared the table and carried it away. I said nothing. I just smiled weakly and folded my hands in my lap. But inside, something in me broke a little more. The silence that followed me home after those nights was heavier than anything I'd known before. I would sit alone in my apartment, staring at the suit I had bought, the envelope of savings tucked away, the ledger of sacrifices that no one else would ever see. My heart whispered that I was losing her, that every laugh she shared with them was another step away from me. I told myself it wasn't true. I repeated it like a prayer. She's my daughter. She won't forget me. She can't. But each time I saw her, the distance was greater. Our conversations were shorter. Her reassurances felt rehearsed, hollow. The bond that had once been unshakable was now fraying thread by thread. And then came the moment that shattered me completely. The day of the engagement arrived, and with it, a storm I had not been prepared to weather. I had spent the morning pressing my suit with careful hands, polishing my shoes until they shone, rehearsing in my mind how I would carry myself with quiet dignity. This was my daughter's night, and though I had been pushed to the shadows in all the planning, I wanted to be present. I wanted to stand proud, not for them, but for her. The hall glittered with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm golden light, the tables draped in silk, flowers cascading from towering vases. Laughter and chatter filled the air, the kind of laughter that comes easily to people who have never known the weight of hunger or the pain of sacrifice. I stepped inside quietly, unnoticed at first. Then, as if rehearsed, heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the room. Some guests gave me polite nods. Others barely hid their smirks. I walked forward anyway, my eyes searching for the only face that mattered. And then I saw her. My daughter. She stood at the center of it all, radiant in her gown, her smile lighting up the room. For a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, pride swelled inside me. That's my girl, I thought. The one I raised, the one I gave everything for. But the moment didn't last. The groom's mother, draped in jewels, noticed me and leaned toward a group of guests nearby. Her voice wasn't lowered, not even a little. It was loud enough for the room to hear. Why is he here? We don't need him. This celebration is about our family. The words cut through me sharper than any knife. A wave of awkward laughter spread among the guests, thin but undeniable. Some turned their heads away in embarrassment. Others chuckled openly, as though the humiliation of a father was entertainment. My hands trembled at my sides. My chest burned, each beat of my heart like a blow against my ribs. I felt suddenly small, like an intruder at the very moment I should have been standing tall. I caught sight of my daughter then. Her smile faltered, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. Was it shame? Helplessness? Fear? She looked at me, then at them, caught between two worlds, and I wondered which she would choose. I tried to steady myself. I told myself I had endured worse. Years of loneliness, of sacrifice, of being dismissed. I could endure this too. So I turned, slowly, ready to leave. Better to slip away quietly than stand there as the object of their ridicule. But before I could take that first step toward the door, something unexpected happened. The music softened. The microphone squealed faintly as my daughter stepped forward, taking it in her hands. The chatter dimmed as the guests turned their attention toward her. Her eyes swept the room, then landed on me. For a heartbeat, time froze. My chest tightened. My palms were damp, and then she spoke. Her next words changed everything. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand, though her voice, when it rang out, was steady enough to cut through every murmur in the hall. "Without him," she said, her eyes fixed on me, "I wouldn't be standing here tonight." The room went silent, utterly, painfully silent, the kind of silence that carries weight, pressing down on every chest, demanding attention. I froze where I stood, unsure if I had heard her correctly. A rush of heat flooded my face, my ears buzzing. For a moment it felt like no one else existed. Just my daughter, her words, and the years of sacrifice that suddenly felt seen. She continued, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. "This man," she pointed to me, "is not just a guest. He is not a burden, and he is not someone to be dismissed. He is my father. My everything. He raised me alone when my mother left. He worked night shifts so I could study. He skipped meals so I wouldn't go hungry. He stood in every crowd clapping the loudest, even when no one else cared. And now, in front of all of you, someone dares to say he isn't needed?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests clapped their hands over their mouths, others exchanged shocked glances. A few even nodded, murmuring in approval. I felt my knees weaken. My eyes blurred with tears I hadn't wanted to shed here, not in front of them. But hearing her speak, hearing her remember, was more than I could bear. The groom's mother shifted uncomfortably, her jeweled fingers tightening around her clutch. "Darling," she said through a forced smile, "this isn't the time for—" My daughter cut her off. "No, this is the time, because I've stayed silent too long while you treated my father like he was invisible. But he isn't invisible. He is the reason I'm here. He is the reason I became the woman your son fell in love with." The hall erupted then. Some clapped, others gasped louder. A few older guests even stood applauding. But on the other side, I saw the groom's family stiffen with fury. The groom himself tried to take the microphone from her, his face pale, his smile strained. "Honey, please, let's not make a scene." She pulled the mic away, her voice unwavering. "If defending my father is making a scene, then I'll make the loudest one this hall has ever heard." I watched as her shoulders squared, her back straightened, and her eyes blazed with a fire I had not seen since she was a child. The same fire she had when she once told me she'd become something more than the world expected of her. That same fire now burned here, for me. The groom's father slammed his glass down on the table, the sharp crack echoing. "This is outrageous. If this is how things will be, maybe this marriage should be reconsidered." The words hung heavy in the air. A hush fell again. Guests leaned forward, eyes darting between the families, waiting for what would come next. My heart clenched, fear tangled with pride. I wanted to tell her to stop, to calm the storm before it destroyed everything she had dreamed of. But my voice was gone, trapped behind the tears I fought to hold back. The groom's mother hissed under her breath, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Ungrateful girl. You choose him over us?" And then came my daughter's final blow, the words that shook even me. She lifted her chin, her eyes glistening with tears but burning with certainty. "If you can't accept my father, then you don't deserve me." Gasps erupted once more, louder than before. Some guests cheered, clapping furiously. Others whispered in disbelief. The groom's family sat frozen, their pride shattered in front of everyone, and I stood rooted to the floor, my heart pounding. Pride, love, fear, disbelief, all of it collided inside me until I could barely breathe. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My daughter wasn't just defending me. She was about to make a choice that would change her life forever, and her final decision shocked even me. For a long, breathless moment after her words, the hall felt frozen in time. The guests were still whispering. The groom's family sat stiff with rage, and I simply stood there, struggling to understand that what I'd just heard was real. My daughter, my little girl who had seemed so torn, so far away from me, had just chosen me, openly, in front of everyone. The groom's face was pale, his jaw tight. His eyes darted between his parents, whose fury was etched into every line of their expressions, and my daughter, who stood tall and unwavering. He looked like a man caught between two burning buildings, each demanding he take a side. "Is this really what you want?" he whispered to her, though the microphone caught his words and carried them across the room. "To humiliate my parents? To risk everything we've built?" My daughter's answer was firm, her voice ringing with clarity. "What we've built means nothing if it starts with me abandoning the man who built me." The room erupted again, some in applause, others in shocked protests, but I no longer heard them clearly. My ears buzzed with the sound of my heart, my chest tight with pride and fear all tangled together. The groom's mother rose to her feet, her jewels clinking as she pointed toward me. "You're letting him poison you against us. You think love is enough? Love doesn't pay for venues or buy respect. Families like ours need dignity, status." My daughter turned to her calmly. "You mistake status for dignity. Real dignity is in sacrifice, in loyalty, in love that doesn't falter even when the world turns its back. My father has more dignity in his worn hands than all your glittering chandeliers combined." Her words silenced even the boldest whispers. The groom lowered his head, torn apart by the weight of two worlds colliding. I almost pitied him. Almost. Because in that moment I realized he was being tested. Not by wealth, not by appearances, but by love itself. True love is never just about two people. It is about the families they choose to honor, the sacrifices they are willing to stand by. And as the silence stretched, I could see it, the doubt in his eyes. He loved her, yes. But did he love her enough to stand against the people who raised him? Or would he choose the easier path, the path of obedience to pride and money? My daughter waited for his answer, her face calm, but her fingers trembling around the microphone. I knew she was scared, but she stood her ground anyway, and in that moment, I saw the reflection of every lesson I had tried to teach her. To be brave, to stand for truth, to never let anyone strip away her worth. And me? I said nothing, because this was not my battle to fight. This was hers. I stood quietly, watching the storm swirl, and in the stillness of my heart, a strange peace began to grow. Because whether she walked away from this engagement or not, she had already given me the greatest gift. She had remembered. She had remembered who I was, what I had done, and she had claimed me openly, proudly. I thought back to the nights of cold dinners, the birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes, the times I patched her shoes instead of buying new ones. I remembered every sacrifice, every ache, every moment of loneliness I had carried. And for the first time I realized something important. None of it had been in vain. Even if the world dismissed me, even if the groom's family sneered, even if I walked home alone tonight, my place as her father was secure. Because dignity isn't handed to you by others. It's earned through love, through loyalty, through sacrifice. And no amount of wealth or status could ever erase that truth. I looked around the hall then, at the faces staring, judging, whispering. I realized that many of them would walk away remembering the scandal, the drama, the humiliation of a wealthy family brought low by a daughter's defiance. But some, just some, would walk away remembering the love of a father and daughter, stronger than pride, louder than mockery. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The groom finally raised his head, his eyes meeting my daughter's. "I don't know if I can stand against them," he said softly, though again the microphone betrayed his whisper to the whole hall. His voice trembled, his hands clenched. "But I know I can't stand without you." Whether that was enough for her, I didn't yet know. But for me, the answer didn't matter anymore, because I had already won. Later that night, as the guests slowly dispersed, as the hall emptied of its glittering lights and hollow laughter, I walked beside my daughter. She held my arm tightly, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, and in that simple gesture, I found the answer I had been searching for all along. Respect. Not the kind bought with money or borrowed from titles, but the kind that comes when love is acknowledged, when sacrifices are seen, when the truth is spoken out loud for the world to hear. And as I looked at her, I thought of every parent who has ever given more than they could afford, every father or mother who has been mocked for not having enough, every parent who has been told they weren't needed. I wish they could have seen this moment, because it was proof that love and respect are worth more than chandeliers, than banquets, than wealth. I may not have had much to give her in this life, but what I gave was mine, my time, my sweat, my sleepless nights, my dreams poured into her hands. And in return, she gave me something priceless, her loyalty, her love, her voice when mine failed. As the night closed, I held on to that truth, branding it into my heart so that I would never forget. Wealth fades, pride crumbles, but the bond of love between a parent and child is stronger than anything this world can throw at it. But even as joy swelled in my chest, I could not deny the ache that lingered too, because betrayal leaves scars, deep, unseen, lasting. The sneers, the laughter, the dismissal, I would carry them always. Yet love heals deeper than betrayal can wound. And that was the truth I carried with me into the night. The hall has long emptied now. Yet the echoes of that night still linger in my mind. I walk through the silence of my small home, a home that once felt too quiet, too lonely, but tonight carries the warmth of something eternal. I replay every moment, her words, her defiance, the way she held her head high in a room determined to break her spirit. It is a memory I know I will carry until my last breath. I once believed love could be erased by wealth, silenced by power, buried beneath humiliation. But I was wrong. Love is stubborn. It lives in the smallest gestures, in the hidden corners of memory, in the resilience of hearts that refuse to forget. My sacrifices, though mocked by others, were never wasted. They had been seeds, planted quietly in the soil of my daughter's soul. And that night, before the eyes of the world, they bloomed. There was a time I thought being poor made me powerless, that not having the right clothes, the right connections, the right voice meant my worth could be measured and dismissed. But I know now that dignity cannot be bought or sold. It is earned in the quiet hours, in the unseen struggles, in the way we love even when no one applauds. I don't know what lies ahead for her. I don't know if the groom will choose love over pride, or if their story will end here. But I do know this. Whatever path she walks, she will never walk it alone. Because she knows now, and the world knows too, that her father stands behind her. That no amount of sneers or whispers can undo the bond we share. And perhaps that is the lesson, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt unseen. Love may be ignored, but it cannot be erased. Betrayal may sting, but it cannot destroy what was built with truth. We are more than the titles others deny us, more than the wealth we lack, more than the shame the world tries to press upon our shoulders. I used to wonder if my sacrifices would ever matter, if my love would ever be remembered. Tonight, I have my answer. They may have said they didn't need me, but my daughter proved I was needed all along.